As snow continued to blanket the city of Philadelphia on January 26, 2011, Ellen Greenberg, a schoolteacher, headed home to her Manayunk neighborhood apartment that she shared with her fiancé. Just hours later, he was dialing 911. He said he found Ellen, quote, on the floor with blood everywhere, before saying that she either stabbed herself or fell on a knife. Police arrived to the scene and from the beginning treated Ellen's death like a suicide. After conducting an autopsy, the medical examiner's office originally ruled her death a homicide, before reversing course and changing the manner of death to suicide. Ellen was found dead with 20 stab wounds, including multiple to the back of her neck. For the last 14 years, Ellen's parents, Sandee and Josh Greenberg, have been steadfast in their belief that their daughter was murdered and have been fighting to get justice for Ellen ever since. In February of 2025, the pathologist who originally conducted her autopsy said he now believes Ellen did not take her own life. Nancy Schwartzman, showrunner and director of Death in Apartment 603, What Happened to Ellen Greenberg, joins Forbes True Crime to discuss her new series that dives into the case. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, the host of Forbes True Crime. Joining me now is Nancy Schwartzman, showrunner and director of Death in Apartment 603, What Happened to Ellen Greenberg. Nancy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I am from the Philadelphia area originally, and I was there when Ellen Greenberg died in 2011. And the case throughout these past 14 years, has always stuck out to me because of the questions around it. Namely being that Ellen Greenberg was found with 20 stab wounds, some of them being in the back of her neck, but her death was ultimately ruled as suicide. So to start off the conversation, how did you get involved in this case? And 14 years later, why did you decide now was the time to shine the spotlight on Ellen and her family story?
Well, I just want to really acknowledge the Greenberg family. Ellen's parents have been fighting for 14 years because they know their daughter, they knew their daughter, they knew suicide didn't add up, on like who she was and how she died. And they've just been asking the question for years, painstakingly walking through this process to try to reveal more answers. What happened? What did her body look like? What did the 911 call look like? Is there surveillance imagery? So we wanted to show in the series this like painstaking journey that they had to go on. Like first you're in shock, your daughter who's a few months away from getting married to the love of her life, who's experiencing some anxiety, but nothing, super alarm worthy, right? And then to have this terrible shock and trauma occur and have it splash in the headlines and then kind of disappear, because once it's ruled as suicide, it just like goes away. Watching them and like really hearing and understanding their story, and as more information got revealed, it becomes harder and harder to accept that this could possibly be a suicide. So we also wanted to hear from like the experts who lent their time and effort. There's a, veteran Philly cop who joins the investigation, Tom Brennan, free of charge, just like, this doesn't sound right. There's a former attorney for the district attorney's office who's listened to 1,000 911 calls, right? It's like, we don't even understand, like law enforcement, these DAs, they like know this world really well. And this case jumped out to them, right? So we really wanted to look at, well, what is so unusual about it and what doesn't add up. So there had been this very slow build over the years, and then suddenly a lot of momentum around Ellen's case, because the family finally had gathered enough sort of evidence and video of, to launch some lawsuits against the city, against the medical examiner's office, and against the Supreme Court for ruling the death a suicide. So I got on board, and it was kind of really intense timing. I got on board December, and February they went to trial. So it was like, oh my God, let's go. Like, it's happening. So after 14 years, suddenly we're in the halls of City Hall, and they reach a settlement, right? And the medical examiner, walks back his initial finding of suicide. Literally, my kind of my first day on the job in a way, our first day with the camera. So it just, the timing has been really perfect for shining a light on this case now.
That's really incredible that that was essentially your first day, but the series really shows just how painstaking this was for Ellen's parents, Josh and Sandee, and just how much they are advocating for their daughter when it seemed like a lot of those 14 years, they were almost screaming into the void. Because when you hear this story, everyone's alarm bells go up, but it seemed like nothing was getting done. And now all of a sudden, like you said, things are happening. But I'm curious to understand the process of how this all came together, because one of the most frustrating parts was that it seems like there's a lack of evidence, right? Because the police treated the scene like a suicide, so it was cleaned up by crime scene cleaners, and it didn't seem like, or not that much was preserved from that. I mean, knowing that, how did you piece together this documentary then with the limited evidence that was available?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky that those things happen. So it's important to even name what happened, right? Within the first 48 hours, you are supposed to hold a scene. If you have enough questions that you're not sure, homicide, accidental, suicide, hold the scene as if it's a homicide, right? Like, protect it. So the first thing that we can always do is lay out what happened in detail and what didn't happen. So those big gaps also tell a story. You're like, wow, there wasn't a held scene. Her technology was taken off the scene. Could that have been tampered with? We don't know, but we certainly know it was removed and returned. We did have a few eyewitnesses who made statements to law enforcement, and we were able to talk to them in person, like the building manager, the concierge at the front desk, and a neighbor. So we were able to like get people who were there that night and would walk the halls and see Ellen. And, you know, the concierge, Phil, is important to the story because he's the kind of doorman who would see Ellen every day. You know, he's not like a good friend, but it's the person that sees Ellen every day when she comes in and comes and goes, and kind of knew her excitement about the wedding. For him, it's like, how on earth could that have been a suicide? So hearing those eyewitness statements from those folks, looking at some police statements, not a lot, then you have the 911 call, which is really, you know, gripping and salient. And so you can really listen to it and hear it. Understanding, you know, we actually go back to the Venislov's apartment, which is later on in the series. So really getting to sort of move around in that space, you get a sense of, you know, where is the elevator in relation to the door? What phone calls are being made? How far away is Ellen when she's found from the door? Could it have been clear that there was a knife in her? There's all this stuff that the series goes into that's really bolstered by getting to be in the apartment with experts. You know, that was like really important for us. So, I mean, look, I think our job in making the show is to lay out the facts and really make clear that a suicide is not the answer. That's not what happened here. We don't have definitive answers because a lot was removed or cleaned up, or 14 years later, it's, you know, but I think we are able to point to huge flaws in the investigation that show suicide makes no sense here.
I am really curious how you view your role as a director here, because like you said, you came onto this project after the family has been carrying this torch for 14 years. There are so many unanswered questions in this case. Do you view yourself as someone who's taking that torch for the family and continuing to carry that? Do you view yourself as someone who's talking to experts, looking at the evidence, listening to that 911 call, talking to family members, and perhaps gaining a new perspective? I mean, what does that really look like for you?
Yeah, I think, you know, I always wanted to create like a 360-degree portrait of any incident or crime. And we absolutely reached out to everybody that was involved, the medical examiner, any law enforcement at the time, certainly Ellen's former fiance and his family. You know, we would have loved to hear from more people. They all refused to speak. So we want to be mindful. This is not like this is ABC News Studios, and everything has multiple citations, and it's really held up to a very high level of journalistic integrity. So that was number one, the most important thing. Like, there are no theories, there are no, you know, we can brainstorm ideas, but the bottom line is everything needs to be backed up with documentation and somewhat expert opinion. So my job was to gather those together and tell a really compelling story. So you understand what happened, you see a suicide designation and understand that's really unlikely, and that you don't lose Ellen's humanity, which really needed to stay at the center. Like, a lot of times I don't do projects that are sort of crime for crime's sake. Like, this is really a miscarriage of justice. This is about a grieving family. This is about something terrible that happened to this young woman and what the family's gone through from one institution to another. So I'm not a detective, I'm a director, but I do get to go to these places and choose the people that we want to weigh in and choose experts that are really, really good at their job and hear what they have to say about the evidence we were able to find and present to them.
I do want to say, because I watched this series twice now in preparation for this conversation, that A, you really relied on the facts here when telling this story, and B, through your conversations with Ellen's family, with her cousins, with her parents, with her childhood friends, and all the photos you used of Ellen, you really kept her at the center of this story, and you really kept her humanity there as well. I do now want to switch over a little bit and talk about the media's role in telling her story. Tom Brennan, a retired police officer who now works as a PI for the family for free covering this case, called all the journalists who initially covered the case, and the only one to respond was a Philadelphia Inquirer reporter, Stephanie Farr. She answered, and she wrote a story about it in 2019 entitled A Locked Room Mystery. And eyeballs were then back on this story, and it entered the conversation once again. So can you talk to us a little bit about how the media played a part in this story over the past years?
Yeah, so, you know, in this particular case, the media on some level was the family's last hope to get anything out. And Tom Brennan, you know, absolutely went and tried to find someone who'd be willing to do a story on this older case. And Stephanie Farr of the Philly Inquirer, she was not an investigative reporter. This was her first big investigative crime piece, right? She was covering it, but that was not her. She wasn't in the investigation department, and the piece took a year, and we are so grateful to her work and the 17 editors that signed off on the piece. So in a way, Stephanie broke the story, and the family participating with the media really is what has helped Ellen's story move forward and get circulation. And they've been, you know, really relentless in terms of pushing and making sure that people don't forget and people know the facts. So I think the media really bolstered attention because they did their job. Like, Stephanie Farr is a journalist. She's not an advocate, right? She's not biased either way. She's trying to get answers, and she's trying to get answers from the district attorney's office or the Philadelphia Police Department, and they owe us, the public, answers, right? If there are public institutions, they should be responding to our questions, you know? So if it wasn't for Stephanie or, you know, for example, reporter Annie McCormick, who's been covering the case quite a bit in Philly, you know, we'd be either in like conspiracy theory land on YouTube, or there'd be silence. So I feel really grateful, and I think the family does too, that working in tandem with reporters to tell a fair, unbiased story is really sometimes the key to getting anything to change.
And to that point, that brought this story right back into not only a local conversation, because I'm still very in touch with Philly-centric news, but really a national conversation. You saw specials of this case. You saw this case on podcasts. So when you see that, how do you look at that type of coverage before you started your documentary? Do you build off that? How do you make something new when there's already been coverage of the case?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't personally dive into podcasts, but I had some people on my team who like love that and are in there. And I find to me that like muddies the waters a little bit because it's very easy to, people were making statements about, let's say, Ellen's bruises on her body, right? So Ellen was found with bruising in addition to stab wounds. There was bruising on her body in various stages of healing, which means over time. So they were older than the night of her death, right? So we can extrapolate a lot of different possible meanings there. People are going on and on with their theories online, but they haven't seen the autopsy photos. Like, part of me doesn't want to listen to anyone who has not seen the imagery, who has not looked at the paperwork, who has not talked to witnesses, right? Because anybody can come up with an opinion. We all have tons of opinions. A lot of people are creative. There's a lot of ways you can go. So for me, when I first jumped on the story, CNN had written a piece that was really fascinating, interactive piece, quite inclusive, included, some things I hadn't known before. So I think big deep dive reports that come with paperwork that becomes public can be really, really helpful. So for me, I look at who did they talk to? Yep, we've already talked to them. Or yeah, we don't need to necessarily talk to this person, we have this person. It's kind of like, who are their sources, and then what are the documents they're working from. So that's kind of what I look at. In terms of podcasts where people are giving theories, like whatever, we all can come up with stuff.
And to that point, I liked what you said earlier about you don't cover crime for crime's sake. And then you see that type of kind of insidious section of the true crime world where people are just talking conspiracy theories. You're working not only in the facts, but you're also talking to victims and family members of the victims. And this is not your first time doing a documentary that delves into crime. So when you're covering something as delicate, as sensitive as this, what do you think overall of the true crime industry? Because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and you're coming at it, handling it with such care and deep dives into conversations. So what do you make of this industry?
Look, last year we soft launched my series, Sasha Reed and the Midnight Order, at CrimeCon. And it was CrimeCon in Nashville. And we were a little bit like, okay, never been to CrimeCon. Is it going to be different than Sundance? What's it like? Actually, I was so moved when I was there by how much people care about victims in that space. So I think it's a multifaceted space. And I personally was really kind of buoyed by the amount of people who want answers, who know about injustice. And, it is kind of a female-driven space because so often victims of crime are women, right? So we know intimately what it's like to feel unsafe. We've all had our own brushes with situations. So I was actually heartened by how deeply people do care within the true crime space, beyond just like, ooh, I want to solve a mystery. There's a certain human love of puzzles and mysteries, and God bless like Agatha Christie and all that. It's fun. Mysteries are fun. At the center of all the stories I tell, and a lot of the stories we know, is real tragedy and trauma, right? And so how do we hold space to honor the families and respect families and help them try to get justice? Is a very nebulous term because when your loved one is taken from you, there is no justice, but you want things to at least, you want to believe in a system that can give you answers or can, hold power to account. So I think the more people like me telling stories and the more trust I can build with families to get their stories out there and really do it from a nuanced, ethical place, the better we are. Yeah.
This is not your first time covering a crime that has to do with injustice. You directed the documentary Victim Suspect, and that's a totally different story. But it's a story about people who go to the police to report that they were sexually assaulted, but then they ultimately get charged with a crime, whether it be making a false police report or another crime. And in both stories, there's a sense of injustice. There's also people in both documentary series that talk about, hey, I was someone who always trusted and believed in law enforcement, but then this experience happened and now I'm jaded and now that illusion is shattered. So what do you think the hardest part is from your perspective of sharing and telling these stories?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want people to walk away thinking there's no hope. Because in Victim Suspect, one of our kind of shining heroes is a cop, right? Whose sister was assaulted and saw within his own community of cops, like they didn't do anything, right? And so that ignited a fire in him to really care and really do the hard work of investigating sexual assaults, right? And not letting, not letting a busy desk say, you know what, let's just let's get this case out of here, right? And I think sometimes we're also just trying to find the answer, like, why is this happening in police departments? Is it because they're overworked? Is it because they don't believe women? What is going on here? And I think always what's going on is human error, right? That's kind of the beginning, right? So maybe in Ellen's case, it was a snowstorm. It's a very low crime area. If you know Manayunk, where she was, it's cops who do not get these calls often, right? If ever in their career. And, nice lady, sad fiance. They say it's a suicide, right? So maybe that was an early mistake. And I think we need to give space to correct your mistakes, right? And if this is a mistake, then you need to go back and correct for it. And, as they say, come correct. And then we can all say, okay, like we're all operating from the same playing field. A mistake was made and now you guys are going to try to course correct. And thank you for acknowledging, right? So I think, Tom Brennan is a beautiful example of law enforcement who does care, right? So it is hard because the big institutions kind of rally around each other and they're hard to crack if a mistake is made. But I always like to make sure we're shining a light on the individuals who do care, who are making a difference, who are lending their talents and experience to trying to right the wrongs.
And earlier this year, it seems like some wrongs are attempted to be righted. The Greenbergs scored some legal victories. The doctor who performed Ellen's autopsy said he no longer can say she died by suicide, and the city's medical examiner's office said they will reopen and review her death. You spent a good amount of time working on this project. You talked with the Greenbergs for hours on end. You've worked with them. What do you hope comes out of this for them?
Yeah, I mean, we are very close to getting an answer from the city. They ruled, they had a settlement on February 3rd, and they were supposed to re-examine and give an answer in an expeditious amount of time. And then it's like 8-9 months later. So a judge pulled them, a judge had the city respond to, hey, where's the re-examination on September 3rd, which was like 2 weeks ago, right? So now we believe that I think this will hold October 14th, the medical examiner's office has to give their answer. So we are, weeks away from the family hearing if the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office, upon re-examination, is going to say that actually we need to call this undetermined, we don't know, or we're going to call this a homicide, or if they're going to double down and call it a suicide. So we really don't know. We're like hanging in the balance. What I hope for the family is that they feel that a thorough reexamination was done and the outcome matches the evidence. So even with a cleaned up crime scene, Ellen's body tells a story, and it's to my mind a very clear story. It's to many medical experts included, a very clear story. So I think the Greenbergs would like some truth coming out of the institutions.
And to that point, experts, the Greenbergs themselves, and the rest of the family, they believe that Ellen died by homicide. I know then Attorney General, now Governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, believes that evidence pointed to, at the time, suicide. When you're going through the making of this documentary and all of these conversations and looking at the evidence and going through that 911 call, did your perspective change at all? Or did you think, hey, there were some serious questions here and this just confirmed what I believed at the beginning?
I think there are absolutely questions that I do not have the answer to because there are no cameras. I wasn't there. I think anyone who thinks they know exactly what happened in this time frame, like I think that kind of stuff, that's where I get very hesitant because there's a lot of stuff we do not know. But I think, for me, which is also why I included the visuals of what happened to Ellen, normally I wouldn't do that, right? I wouldn't show graphic imagery of someone if it was just a clear cut. I mean, you might need to know this was what is called overkill, because 20 stab wounds is generally deemed overkill. It's not 3, it's 20. So because the city was doubling down on continuing to call this suicide, it was important for me to show the blunt force trauma wounding on the back of her head and the multiple wounding. Like that is it's so stark. So I think the bruising also indicated something else was going on as well. So I think diving really deeply in, there are more questions I have, but certainly calling this a suicide is something I would never believe.
Death in Apartment 603, What Happened to Ellen Greenberg, is out now. Where can people find it?
They can find it on September 29th. They can find it on Hulu.
Nancy Schwartzman, thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime. I know I really appreciated the project, and I hope everyone can have an opportunity to watch.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It was a great conversation.